Hi, my name is Yvonne Ng, and I am presenting this talk that I gave at the Talent Management Alliance this August 2013 in California, because a lot of people were unable to make the talk. It was the last talk of the last day, so a lot of people had flights out. Anyway, and they asked me if I could let them see the slides. And my slides are good, but sometimes they require a little bit more explanation, which is of course why I give talks. So this is the talk that I gave. It's pretty quick and dirty, so I apologize for the background there. But I just wanted to give this talk to the people who had missed it. The start of the talk here is I'm from, at the time that I gave this talk, I was just coming off of being the executive director of St. Catherine University's National Center for STEM Elementary Education. And the folks at TMA, Talent Management Alliance, talked with me and asked me if I would give a speech about opening the STEM pipeline, the impact of starting STEM early. And so I was really happy to do that because it's something I've been thinking about lately, having had a son recently myself, and also having a very strong interest in STEM education. So before I go into some of the work that I've been seeing as the director as well as a faculty member in this center that provides professional development for teachers in STEM, I want to give you a little bit of the background so that we're all sort of starting at the same place. Let's first talk about need. I'm an engineer, so I can't help but talk about need. And so part of the thing you've probably heard a lot of hype about is that we need a lot of STEM educated children or graduates from high school or even college in order to fill these STEM jobs. So my question was, of course, well, how big is this need? And a lot of what I found out is that it depends on how you count them. So if we take a look at what what traditionally is called STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, mathematics jobs, where people are employed as scientists, as technicians, as engineers, and as mathematicians. In 2008, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 4.3% of all people employed in the country had these types of jobs. Which actually makes me go, well, that doesn't seem like a huge crisis, but let's keep going. If you include jobs such as technicians, programmers who don't always have to have a computer science degree, for example, but they do technical jobs that are related to these STEM areas, and then science and engineering managers, this increases to 5.8%. Again, you can see why there's some debate about whether this is really a crisis. Let's take one moment to take a look at these jobs a little bit further so we really have a sense of what these jobs are. This is from the National Science Foundation's info brief, and they took that 5.8% and anyway, they divided it up. So in this upper area, the upper left-hand quadrant, you can see that technicians, programmers, and managers constitute about a fourth of these particular jobs. Social, physical, and life scientists constitute, looks like about a sixth of that. And then all the rest are engineers and then math and computer scientists. Now, the thing is that the people who are in the industry of selling innovation keep saying that there's a problem that we don't have enough people going into STEM to fill these STEM positions, because that's where a lot of our economic strength and viability comes from, these new age, new technical areas. And that's that 5+% that we're talking about. But this study just came out recently, like in June of this year, from the Brookings Institute, and they call it the hidden STEM economy. And I think it's very telling to what really is this sense of crisis that's happening. They said, you know, we need to really think of a new definition of STEM. Those other jobs that the National Science Foundation articulates as STEM are really super STEM. They call them super STEM, where you have to actually have a broad understanding of multiple areas, science, technology, engineering, and math, to a good level of depth in all of those areas. But they said if we think about a STEM job being any job that requires some deep knowledge in any one of these areas, then suddenly we find that there are more jobs that get affected by children who do not understand or are not interested in STEM. What they found is that more than that, not only does this percentage increase, which I'll show you in a moment, but of those STEM jobs with these new definitions, 50% of them do not require a college degree. So as a result, there's a lot more people and a lot more jobs that are affected by STEM literacy, so to speak. And those jobs, as indicated in blue, relate to the maintenance, repair, and construction of our modern technological world, as well as health professions. Imagine, of course, a nurse that doesn't understand science, a plumber who doesn't understand science, or a carpenter who doesn't have a command of mathematics. You start having some problems in your society then. This is a really neat graphic that the Brookings Institute had, that there are 26 million STEM jobs in the United States, and those comprise, this is this new definition, 20% of all US jobs. That becomes more significant, that if you have students who don't have any understanding, no interest in, you suddenly have a big deficit of jobs and essential jobs for keeping our country moving along. That's 1 in 5. 1 of every 5 jobs requires a knowledge of STEM. And I don't even think they've even touched upon things that require mathematics, for example, accounting. There's a museum around here that actually has an outreach program that talks to students about people of STEM or people of science. And so they pull in people like personal trainers, they pull in massage therapists and so forth. So people who have to have an understanding of science or math or technology or engineering. This is the graph on the far right is very interesting as well, because it indicates that the share of jobs, the number of jobs requiring STEM knowledge has doubled since the Industrial Revolution, which makes sense. If most of our society is built around technology, it's not surprising that innovation, maintenance, and continuation of a society that depends on those is going to require knowledge of that. So once we defined the need, and that there is some agreement that there is some need, and of course at the conference that I was at there was a need, because they accepted that there was a need because they were all there at that conference, the situation becomes interesting. So now if you see that we need to have this as a country, what is our current situation? And what we find is we have problems in 2 distinct areas: proficiency and interest. This graph comes from the Business Higher Education Forum study, in which I think Raytheon actually was involved with this, of creating computer models, taking data that they had and projecting out. What they found out in this was if you take interest on one level, proficiency on the other axes, you find that 17.3% of all of the graduating high school or the 12th graders are both proficient and interested in STEM. But the 2 quadrants on the upper left and the lower right indicate our lost potential. On the upper left, 15.2 of all these students had a high interest in STEM, but did not have the academic background to be proficient in pursuing a meaningful career in that, and to be able to exercise that interest to a meaningful state. On the lower right-hand side, we have 25.4% of all of the students who actually are proficient, but indicate that they have no interest. I actually teach a lot of teachers in professional development in STEM, and one of them I was discussing this data with, and she said, or they think they're not interested. And that's where she felt as a teacher that her job was to point out the things that were there. She said she herself was one of those types of students. She had a lot of proficiency, but she didn't think she was interested in it at all. And now that she's a teacher and learning more about it, she's like, I could have been an engineer. I would have loved being an engineer. So there's different aspects playing into this. So let's talk about this area of proficiency. Because you can't just say that it's about proficiency, and most of all, educators struggle with the fact that it may not all be about testing. So this data actually came from an article that recently came out in the Smithsonian, and it indicates on the left-hand side the proficiency of students in science according to testing, and the proficiency of students in math according to testing. Now here's the interesting thing. You can of course look at the overall aspects, you can compare them across different countries and so forth, which people have, but this is what I find interesting. We look at 4th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade, and we said that the highest proficiency of students is highest in 4th grade, and it descends downwards. It's always descending downwards. Whether your group is male or female, white, black, Hispanic, Asian Pacific, or American Indian, Alaskan, Native, it's always descending. And so if you look at this data, you wonder, well, what the heck is happening? University of Massachusetts did a research paper on study on this and found that there was a relationship not of proficiency and interest. And that scientific achievement correlates to the attitudes towards science, which makes sense. If you like the subject, you're going to want to put more effort into it, learn more, and you'll achieve better. So in that sense, that's kind of what they found out. I always think studies like this are funny. It's like, well, duh, that kind of makes sense. But they have the data behind it. This next statement, this is how they stated it, but it's a little confusing. It says positive perceptions of science are lower among older students than younger. Or what that says is that younger students have more positive perceptions of science than older students do. Now this is the science, and so that's sort of the interesting thing. So I actually had said this is really interesting. If we see this descent as students get older, we have this descending interest in STEM areas, because mathematics actually shows a similar thing. Well, where the heck does this start? How high of an interest is there in children in STEM? So I started actually talking with early childhood folks, and of course at the same time I gave birth to my son, and I started to observe and read all of the different things. So the biggest thing is to understand what STEM looks like in the early years, and then that way you can find out how many kids have these inclinations towards STEM areas. So if we look at early childhood, and when I talk early childhood, I'm talking babies through preschool. And so if we look at science, inclinations for science, what does science inclination look like at this age group? Well, it's interesting. When I was reading about and listening to reports about children, they often call them the scientist in the cradle. They are continuously curious about the world around them. And because of this curiosity, they observe, they investigate, they experiment, and they discover. And for them, they build their own models of how the world works. And they do that from a very early age. From the time that your child starts dropping things on the floor and goes, "Ha! Look at that! It fell to the floor. I wonder if it'll do it again." And then when you picked it up and put it down, they drop it again. Look, it goes down again. And then they continue to do it until they realize gravity not only works here in my high chair, or on my bed, or in my crib, or in my car seat, it works everywhere, and it works with a whole bunch of stuff. So that is a scientist in its rawest form, trying to figure out patterns and trying to understand how the world works around them, which is always interesting because, as my Montessori teachers tell me, that's why children are fascinated with bubbles, because this is the one thing that actually, when you put it out there, it goes up. It doesn't go down, and that is just like magic. And yet another thing to be curious about. So we start to find that actually many children have inclinations towards scientific investigation in their very early years. Let's take a look at an engineer. It's often called the toddler engineer. And an engineer, if you think about it at this age, is a person who is driven to meet a need or a desire. I mentioned this to a group of early childhood educators in Minneapolis, and they looked at me and they said, well, that's every child, that's every toddler. Every toddler figures out how to meet their need. If I see cookies up there, I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna get up there. If I see this thing that I wanna play with, I'm gonna figure out how to get it into my hands and do the things that I want to. They figure out all sorts of things. What we look for this kind of inclination is persistence, an orientation towards solutions, and an iterative process, trying one thing, trying it again, trying the next thing, and then learning from each one the next thing to do. A little bit of scientific variability that they call, but really it's an engineering trait to be very solution oriented. let's talk about mathematics. I like to tell the early childhood folks, if you're looking for mathematics, what you're really looking for at the early childhood age is pattern finding, and then the language that's associated with it. So pattern finding in terms of size, shape, space, orientation, sense of quantity, one, none, few, more, less, logical reasoning. If I do this, then this happens. If I do that, then what happens? Logical aspects, and then steps, sequences. Oh, this is the sequence of what happens. When I'm done eating, I get a cloth for my hand, I get my mouth wiped, I get taken out of my high chair, and I'm allowed to play. There's a step process that goes on. And then of course the language that goes with it. There's a lot of studies about how language is associated with higher levels of spatial scoring, and then higher levels there of mathematics. Getting a sense of orientation. In is demonstrated here, outside, inside, upside down. I just said a Bernstein Bears book. Far, near, and then directions, north, south, east, west. Technology is actually one of the more early inclinations that I find in early childhood to be where a lot of the teachers start, but they're not always aware of it. The children in the early years are testers. They test out the technology, and the technology you need to think of as not computers, because computers have only been around since the 1950s. Generously, you could think the 1940s if you count ENIAC in World War II. But technology, we've had many technological developments before the 1950s. And so you need to remember that technology is much larger. I group them into sort of large groups of materials, different types of materials that we've had. So all of the ages, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Tin Age, Steel Age, and so forth. Different materials, their properties, the ability to manufacture them, make them consistent. Manufacturing is another type of thing, how to form the materials, cut, fasten, and so forth, in order to create things. Power sources, we've seen different power sources throughout history, and they've all been each their own technological development, from hand tools or hand powered things to wind up things, energy stored in batteries or in springs or in pendulum weights and so forth. And then of course internal combustion engines, where the power is stored in the fuel, to nuclear and so forth. And the last one, of course, is the one that people think about, the computer's intelligence or intelligent or information technology. Those concepts at the early childhood age are about understanding cause and effect, and also sequencing, which are somewhat related to mathematics and the pattern finding. So when children stick materials in their mouth, when they tear things apart, when they crumple them and they crush them, they're testing material properties in very primal, foundational ways. And so they are, in a sense, building their repertoire of understanding the technology that they are surrounded with, so that they can come back to that later when they become engineering or do an engineering project to figure out what materials, what types of things are better. Some children have figured out that a wooden stool is a better thing to stand on for themselves than a plastic stool, and so forth. So these are some of the things we look for when we look to see if a child has an inclination towards STEM in the early years. And every early childhood instructor that I talk with says that almost every child shows these. They do start to see how they may not be encouraging it in some children due to gender, due to physical limitations, or due to assumptions about whether things are safe or not. But in general, from talking with my early childhood folks, this pool is large. So if this potential pool of almost all children seem to show these inclinations towards science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what the heck happens if they have this interest in the beginning? This study by Raytheon is very interesting and may give us some indications of what happens. Now, obviously with surveys, you always have to ask what's the sampling size and so forth, and who were they and so forth. So this was a group of 1,000 middle school students aged 10 to 14. Now, I don't know how representative they are, but I find it interesting that this group indicates certain things in there. Of this 1,000 middle school students, 70% liked math. That's sort of interesting because we keep hearing how people don't like math in middle school. But of these students, 70% of them liked math. In fact, 15% of them said that math was their favorite subject, and 11% said science was their favorite subject. So of these 1,000 students, 26% of them said either math or science was their favorite subject. Not that they liked it, that was their favorite, okay? 48% of them indicated that they enjoyed learning math outside of school. They do math in school, they like doing it outside of school, they liked it. And 58% recognized that math was going to be important for their future. So of these students, who I have to say sound a little high based off of what we've heard, but maybe they're not. I wish that the study had indicated who these students were and where they sampled them from. But let's just say this is a positive representation of students liking math. Of those students, only 56%, actually 56% of the 1,000 students said they'd rather eat broccoli than do math homework. And 44% of them said they would rather take out the trash than do math homework. So that becomes sort of interesting. 70% liked math, but more students, or a significant number of students, would rather do something else than math homework. This is a quote that I gave when I was talking on a panel at my reunions recently, and the Alumni Weekly really liked it a lot. Little kids, boys and girls, are natural scientists and engineers. They love figuring out things. They're always asking why, and then we educate it out of them. Something happens along the way. Back to the Raytheon study. Of those 70% of the students who liked math, majority of them realized that math was important in building a bridge, creating a robot, and running a restaurant. But they missed the importance and relevance of math to a large degree of designing clothing. Only 62% of them thought math was needed. 47% thought that math was needed for skateboard, which means the majority of them did not realize how skateboard design required mathematics. And an even larger majority of them did not realize how math was relevant to doing photography. So if they're missing this connection of STEM, mathematics in particular, to a larger context, that may account for the fact that they don't see the relevance of doing things and getting really good at math. So the question is, what do we do now? As an engineer, I'm always asking that. So there's the problem, there's the need, what do we do? So at this and almost every other STEM conference that I go to, there are two strategies usually. There's a short-term strategy, and that includes triaging. That includes things such as working at that upper level of education from high school, college, and triaging, providing internships so that students have a sense of what these jobs really are, providing mentoring to help retain them through the bumps that are bound to happen in any field that is demanding, to plug the leaks, different areas such as support for underrepresented populations like certain ethnic groups and women in there, and then providing multiple pathways in and out. A lot of push has been done to try to capture some of our veterans who are coming back into the workforce, that might be a pathway in for them. Women who become more mature and more confident and may find that they actually have an interest and a talent in it. New immigrants trying to get the education and getting language skills taken care of and so forth, that they are different multiple pathways into this. So this graph, I want to just give a disclaimer, this graph is not technically a graph. I took this as an amalgamation of the presented data and different things that I've seen. So on the upper left-hand side, I assume that we have nearly 100% of children at the preschool age having an inclination and interest towards STEM, and that starts to steadily decline. The green areas reflect the different pieces of data that we found, which of course themselves are a little odd because we know that there are drop-offs in student populations at each stage of this continuum through 12th grade. So the percentages of all children, this is actually probably very optimistic. It's probably even lower than that, especially as we get into the grade levels, and if you took a cross section, for example, on those in a lower economic area, this would actually drop off probably quite quickly. The 20%, the red line, is indicated at that threshold of the 20% of STEM jobs, needing some knowledge of STEM. And as you can see, by the time the students start to graduate from high school and go into college, that drops off and there's a gap in there. So the triaging methods are mainly to try to keep the people who express an interest still in there and get them into where they need to do to be able to participate in these areas. The other thing I want to mention that Brookings did talk about that I did not talk about before is that a lot of these jobs that have STEM requirements are actually very high paying jobs. And so for those students who are in a lower economic bracket, who have an interest in it, it almost becomes a call to arms to try to get that proficiency up so that they can be able to enter those fields in a competitive way and to reach their full potential. Now, of course, there's always a sense of, oh, you can see this steady decline and, you know, the glass is half empty kind of thing. I'm not really a glass is half full, but I do want to look at the fact that we have an untapped potential. I guess it's the fact that the glass has more room, that we can pour more stuff into it. So if we think of the white area as this untapped potential and the green areas as the ones that are already there, then it presents some very interesting things to do towards a long-term strategy. What I have found is that long-term strategies need to start early. And that's not just because I worked at the Center for Elementary Education. It is because that I've seen the studies, and as we go through, different barriers keep occurring, and that to some extent the clean slate really is very early in life. Who are the ones who can influence children positively or negatively in terms of STEM? Teachers, parents, caregivers. If they want to positively influence them, one of the best ways is to give the children experiences of what is STEM. As I told you before, science is the investigation and curiosity about the world and continuing that. Mathematics is the encouragement of looking for patterns and trying to help point them out and help them see and observe them and try to find them, find relationships and analogies. Engineering is to have them try to solve some problems to meet their needs and desires, and then technology is just really understanding the limitations and characteristics of the world around them and the ability to learn different manufacturing and basically large motor skills. That's what the early childhood people call them. Fine and large motor skills are a lot of what's used in the technology areas. I find early childhood very interesting because you have to provide experiences that are very sensorial. And what I found is that even I'm working with students in college who can understand my words, can understand my speech, can dissect drawings and numbers that I write down. If they have not had key sensorial experiences, it's all abstract. It's all just trying to memorize what I'm saying, every single word that I have. But if I give them the sensorial experience, they have an experience to draw upon. Sometimes that triggers other experiences that they've had in their life. It provides them an avenue to create their own investigative experiences to build more understanding, and then those larger concepts that I address at the college level become much easier for them to understand. So not only is it powerful experiences to have sensorial experiences for children young, if it's anyone's first introduction, sensorial is extremely important, and it becomes evident when it is important, when the children have no words. It is basically their main form of communication and understanding. And so you need to create an experience set based off of that. This picture is actually my nephew, and he had figured out the bite valve because he, as a little engineer, he had observed different things about this bottle, he had observed different things about the materials, and he wanted to get a sip of water. And so he put this all together and actually figured out how to do the bite valve. What are the venues? This talk at the TMA, I was talking to a lot of HR folks, directors of human resources, talent acquisition, talent management, talent development. And the venues that an industry person can influence this are very vast. There's different places to do this. In early childhood, it's so important to think about laying a good foundation. You can start in kindergarten. That certainly is where a lot of the educational standards start, and so there's a lot of interest in that. But you could go even earlier. You could go to preschool, and then you can even go into daycare. As I said, a lot of these experiences happen at the infant stage of life. And the beautiful thing about that is that it complements best practices. There are best practices about what you do with children, infants, and so forth, and a lot of those best practices already do develop STEM things. What I usually do with the teachers and the caregivers is simply show them how they're actually developing the STEM aspects and how to make sure that they don't miss it and forget that that's an important part of what they're doing. Elementary grades, still very important to still address that, because it is the place where equity can happen, because not everyone has the ability to send their children to childhood. Not every child has that experience in there. So we have to do triaging in the elementary grades to make sure that access to these fields and these foundations and knowledges are available to all. So these are usually done in the elementary grades, lower elementary, kindergarten through third grade, upper elementary, and then middle school. And actually, elementary teachers are really good at the STEM stuff once they understand what science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is all about and how it integrates with each other, because they're educated as a generalist. And so they actually have the ability to have some of the most impacting experiences for children that show the breadth of all of those areas and how they can work together. The National Center for STEM Elementary Education at St. Catherine University provides professional development for teachers in these areas. Science, they really emphasize science by doing, not just by reading. It's not about facts, it's about process. They talk about doing technology through hands-on and skill building with tools. They do engineering design projects that are more than just making things. Engineering requires specifications, working within constraints, understanding tolerances, the fact that the world is not perfect, and how do you still design something that actually works within very specific requirements. And then mathematics applied in a real context. So any professional development that they do is always going to be emphasizing those aspects, plus the integration of those things together. The center also provides resources through online and published sources that actually are available. I think they're on Amazon now, or they will be soon if they're not, and on the web page at St. Catherine University. STEM exploration activities, mainly for middle and high school students. Early college for those who want to discover their natural STEM inclination. It's hands-on projects that allow students to solve those, learn about it, have a context for it, and then to discover that they actually do have maybe science inclinations or engineering inclinations or mathematics inclinations. And it links them up to courses they could pursue in college, majors that they could pursue, and then careers that they could look into. And then of course, robotics is a way that people usually try to teach some STEM, and the center has developed materials that actually helps. There's no assumptions that the adult instructor has any experience in engineering background, and it does connect all of the activities back to classroom activities as well. And those are all available online as resources. So what's the result? If we actually can open this STEM pipeline early, what's the result going to be? Well, if we just take that graph that I had before and we simply increase it by a modest 5%, 5% more students are interested in STEM, which we saw has a link to proficiency and then therefore to the potential of being able to pursue STEM-related jobs. We start to see that we may actually hit our 20% threshold, that we may actually have a chance of being able to meet the needs that we have. Just a small, modest, and this is assuming that all those other things that cause this decline to happen still happen. We can't fight society to some extent. We can't fight some circumstances, but at least just increase at every grade level about 5%, and then those students trickle through the system, and at least we can retain them. We may have a chance of doing that. So where can industry influence this interest? Well, where they could, if a company has its own daycare program, obviously there's a huge place that you could just start right away and work with the daycare workers in order to provide and have them aware of inclinations in STEM and provide an environment to encourage those foundational skills. If you have a company that has affiliated daycare, for example, I know like MIT, for example, has some suggested or affiliated daycare providers. That might be a great one. Oh my. Sorry about that. My husband apparently decided to call. I guess we will continue. I apologize for that. He has the ringtone of the Monty Python folks. So, employee schools. If your employees have schools that their children go to, that's another place to be able to influence them. And then local schools, the ones that are nearby your companies, the communities that your company is actually located in, is also a place that you can influence them. What you can do to assist them, from the lowest level of commitment, you can do guest visits. Your employees in STEM go to visit. You have the students come in to have tours of your facilities and see the different types of things they could do with a STEM background. You could help out with fairs, either through sponsorship or providing STEM experts for judging. Kits, you can provide money to purchase kits, equipments, or supplies. And then the highest level of commitment is obviously being able to provide professional development for educators, for the educators in those particular places. And that's one of the things that the National Center provides. So at this point, I actually asked all the participants to talk to their neighbor and to discuss what steps they personally could take to start opening the pipeline in their community, either on a personal level or in their company to do that. And they came up with some great ideas. Some of them built off of what they already had. They already knew that they had some outreach aspects, and so they felt that they wanted to go back to that, expand out, and think more systematically about that. Others had always been contemplating it, but now had more incentive and more data to be able to go and present it again as another thing for their company to move into in the next region. Some people came from a research area, and so they really wasn't about outreach, but they started to see what they could do with their own children and the own communities that they were in. So there's a lot of ways that we as each individuals can do something to open up the pipeline in there. At that point, I opened up for questions, which of course I can't have you now, but I invite you to either write to St. Catherine University. There's a Just Ask page on stem.stkate.edu, and for anything regarding elementary, they are totally the ones to go to. I loved working there. For me, I do the early childhood, and I specialize in that, and you can contact me at engineersplayground.com. Thank you so much, and I apologize for that little goof in the middle. I guess it shows you how low budget I work, just to be able to pass the costs on to you. Anyway, hope everything works out for whatever you try to do in the future. Take care.